So thank you to everybody for joining us today. My name is Dominica and I'm with the Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce. I'm the Partnerships Manager here. And I'd like to introduce everyone to Kathy MacFarlane. She has been wonderful enough to offer to provide us with this presentation today about spiritual intelligence. And I know this is a very, very large topic that likely won't be fully covered today. So I think Kathy is going to give us a nice introduction into the topic, and hopefully we can continue with more sessions like this if everybody loves it. So Kathy, without further ado, I'll let you go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you all for coming, and thanks for having me, Dominica. Excited to share about this. I'll tell you a little bit of how I got into this after a bit, but I'm just curious about who's in the room today and what drew you to this topic. So maybe tell me a little bit about yourself and what interests you about this subject and what you hope to learn today. Anyone want to start? I may need your help, Dominica, because I can't see everyone on the screen.
Are you guys able to hear me? Yeah, it's, oh, here, I'll get video. I'm Kaylee Craddock. It popped up in my inbox this morning. I'm with the Royal Bank. I'm a commercial account manager. So I just thought it sounded like a breath of fresh air. My week and days are filled with meetings, and a lot of it is some pretty heavy stuff. And this just sounded like just a nice change of pace and a good way to spend my lunch hour. So thank you for hosting it.
Great, thank you.
Well, my name is Amanda Jensen. I'm with Volunteer Lethbridge. I am interested because I respect Kathy a great deal for, that would be my first comment. So any teaching she has for me, I would love to take part in. But I also I think it'll be an opportunity for me to learn how to be a better leader, which, and just another aspect of learning to help me be better. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you.
Shelby McLeod here. Same as everyone else. It's just a nice time to spend over your lunch hour and become enriched.
Good, thank you. Anybody else want to share?
I will. When I met with Kathy about a year ago, I just loved what she had to say about the content that she teaches, and I really respected her approach. So I'm excited to hear about it today.
Thank you. Anyone else, or shall we move on? Okay. Well, thank you all again for coming. And I just invite you just to come into this hour and be present with yourself. Your brain is probably full. It's a Monday, the start of a week, lots of things on your to-do list. Maybe you had a busy weekend, but if you can, just take a little bit of time to sort of shake off whatever concerns you have. Imagine yourself putting them in a bag, maybe setting them outside your door. You can always get them later, but for now, just give yourself permission to set everything aside that is on your heart and mind, and just give yourself this hour to be present. This is just a brief agenda of what we'll be talking about today. I'll share some definitions around SQ and some related terms, and what does spiritual intelligence look like? What on earth is it, first of all? Why would we care about trying to foster that in ourselves and in others? And we'll sample a couple of skills. I think we'll get through 2 today out of the 21 that are part of this model. And we'll see how time works. If there might be a third one that we can play with a little bit. And I hope to leave you with some tools and tips that'll help you just in your day-to-day management, because this is first about sort of our internal development, but it's also then how we relate to the outer world and our workplace and solving the big problems in society. It can be really beneficial. So thanks for being here. I'll tell you a little bit about my life story in 4 minutes or less, if I can. I wanted to share with you just a bit about how I came to care about spiritual intelligence as leadership pursuit. But back in the mid-70s, I remember watching this movie called Death Be Not Proud. And it was about a boy who had a brain tumor. And I was very disturbed about the results because he ended up having a bald head from all the surgery and treatments that he had. And that was upsetting enough. But in the end, spoiler alert, if you've not seen this movie, he dies. And I thought to myself, I was really young and didn't really understand the whole movie, but I thought, wow, I'm glad that I'm never going to have a brain tumor. And well, life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans. By the age of 12, I was going paralyzed on the right side of my body, and I was diagnosed with, guess what, a brain tumor. So the short version of that story, it's a long story, but the tumor was removed successfully, and I had a number of complications during my younger years after that, but here I am. Maybe there's a purpose in life for me. But from a very young age, I was very confident of my own mortality. There were no guarantees. I worked really hard. I cherished relationships. I had a lot of empathy for others because of my own condition. And I didn't want to waste a lot of time because I never knew if I would wind up in the hospital again or worse. And I firmly believed I had a purpose in the world, and I didn't take things for granted. I wanted to make the most of time. I really believed in that concept of carpe diem. It was kind of one of my themes for a long time in my life. And that there's a bigger purpose in the world, and everything's interconnected. Then amidst all those health issues, about a year later, and I was still quite sick, my dad died suddenly without any warning. And that's just another thing that only happens to other people. It's like, whoa, that just, but we are so blessed to be surrounded with people who are very loving and caring through all that traumatic time. And I'd assumed that would be enough life lessons. That was a lot to learn and take. I'm lucky for loving family and everything. But years later, my sister died suddenly at age 36, leaving behind her husband, 4 children. The oldest was 9, the youngest was in diapers. And this was another huge lesson. There's lots of challenges that came out of that, but a huge lesson in focusing on what's most important and making the most of time. Never take people for granted. Always say, I love you. And I'm not telling you all this for sympathy, because I have so much to be grateful because of those experiences, through those experiences, and now. But I share it just to paint a picture of those experiences that shape my values and why making a difference, fulfilling a purpose, connecting to others were so important to me. And years later, while pursuing my master's degree, I was learning about the ideal leadership qualities. I did a master's degree in leadership. And I was researching healthy leadership principles like self-awareness and empathy and trust and creating meaning and significance through work, creating a safe place for risk-taking, letting go of control, that's a wild one, being comfortable in the chaos and being comfortable with change. And so finally, that was a kind of leadership that resonated with me, because by that point in my career, I've experienced some more toxic styles of leadership, I'll just say. As I dug deeper, I found that there was this thing called SQ, spiritual intelligence, and it was being studied as a factor in effective leadership. And you've heard of EQ and IQ, and SQ is said to be a capstone intelligence, or SQ helps amplify our other intelligences. And one of the scholars, there were many, but one of the scholars was Cindy Wigglesworth, who came up with a definition and an assessment tool. So she heard about this idea of spiritual intelligence and that it was having an impact on leadership and profitability and success in organizations. But she says, she came from an engineering background. She said, if it's worth talking about, we better be able to measure it. So she spent years doing lots of interviews and studies as to what the common traits were of these leaders. And she came up with 21 skills and a definition. And so I'll tell you her definition and we'll cycle back. But her definition is spiritual intelligence is the ability to behave with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace, regardless of the situation. So what a beautiful skill if we could all foster that, no matter what we're going through, right? Personal-wise or work-wise. And I also want to differentiate a little bit and also just put in a bit of a acknowledgement here, because I'm grateful that you're all here, and some of you may have been really curious what the spirituality piece is all about. because I know that some people can really embrace it. Some people might be skeptical. What's all that woo-woo stuff about? And other people have an outright allergy, and it's because of the sorts of trauma, and we've just been reminded of it again with the recent news in some religious settings. And so I know that I just am very sensitive to that it can be triggering for some people, but I also see through this process, there's some beauty and why, if we foster healthy spiritual intelligence, it can be a contributor to great things. So religion is a set of human practices and organization. It's human practices, human created them, with activity and structure. It might include a building, following a certain sort of belief system. Spirituality is more that innate human need to connect with something larger than ourselves, sacred or divine or higher power, higher purpose. The faith piece fits in there. And then spiritual intelligence is a set of skills that we can look at and measure and define, and we can choose to grow them or not, but being aware of them and choosing to develop them can help us be in the driver's seat of something really positive. So these are a set of the 21 skills, and we'll talk about number 1 and number 15 today. Maybe we'll get to number 18. But as you read this, you can see the different things that contribute to being a wise and effective leader. So are you fully aware of your worldview and your inner nature? How do you know if your ego is in charge or your higher self is in charge? Can you hear your higher voice? Do you know what your values are? Have you ranked your values so that if your values are in conflict, you can make good decisions? How do you stay centered and peaceful even when things are chaotic? And we've all been through a lot of chaos in this last year, both personally and in business, right? How broad is your perspective? All these skills sort of contribute to how we see the world and can manage our life and chaos and such. Can you shift from your ego to your higher self easily? Can you be a calm and healing presence for others? How open are you? If you understand your worldview, can you also understand and respect other worldview? Are you able to act from wisdom and compassion? So those are just some traits that contribute to spiritual intelligence. And I'll just talk a little bit about this assessment tool. I'm a certified coach in this process. So if you're curious to go deeper, I can do that with you and I can give you more information. But the tool is meant to be faith friendly and faith neutral, so people will be able to find themselves ideally in it. There's different levels of attainment, much like you would see in emotional intelligence assessments. And no one has to choose to grow in any particular area, but for those who are curious, there are ways that we can work through exploring the different skills. And we're never finished, we're always growing. So what I'd like to do is try a little exercise here, and if we can all share with the group. What I'd like to invite you to do is think of someone you consider an exemplar leader, a spiritual leader, or just a leader in your workplace, or someone else you've seen great leadership. Someone's probably coming to mind already. It could be someone alive or dead. You may never have actually met the person, that's fine. They don't have to be perfect, but just someone, or write down a set of people that come to mind right away as a leader. I'll just give you maybe a minute or so to jot down some ideas. Does everyone come up with one or a few? I can't see your faces, so I don't want to go too fast. Now what I'd invite you to do is write down the traits of those spiritual leaders. What makes them admirable in your eyes? Don't think about it too hard, just they came to mind for a reason, and there's a reason that they resonate with you. Anyone need more time? Or have you got some ideas as to what you admire about those leaders? Okay, so what I'll invite you to do then is just share, unmute yourself and share some of the names that came up for you. If everyone wants to share one or two, that would be great.
Okay, this is Shelby. Martin Luther King,
Okay,
and because he had a belief, and Lois Hole, the Governor General for Alberta, Lieutenant Governor, wisdom and kindness.
okay.
That's it. I had others, but that's good enough.
Okay, we can cycle back. I love for a big brain dump here. So go ahead, and someone else want to shout out some names and what the traits are.
A couple names I have are personal relations to me. So the names won't mean anything, but one is a cousin of mine, and one was actually my previous manager. And both the words that come to mind is just such a level of kindness, caring, and compassion that both of them have always had.
Great, excellent. Who else wants to share?
Yeah, this is Amanda. I would use an example of somebody currently in my workplace, a coworker.
Okay.
And I find that she is just a tremendous listener. She doesn't rush to fill space. She allows for time to react or to, I don't know, answer, or like there's no knee-jerk reaction from her. It's silence is okay.
Mm-hmm.
I find her to be the most intuitive person I've ever known, where I can, think that I've seen everything from an issue from every different angle, and she'll just say one sentence that turns everything on its ear and allows me to look at it in a different way. So non-judgmental, but very direct. So peaceful and kind, and like I say, a bit quiet, but you'll still hear the truth.
Great, sounds wonderful. Anybody else have something in mind? One or two more people want to share? I can't see who's all in the room, so.
Share. Mine's kind of silly. It's from a TV show that I watch.
Okay.
And the TV show is called The Bold Type. I don't know if anyone watches that. But it's about a bunch of women who work in like a fashion magazine, and their boss is incredible. And the traits about her that I find the most appealing is that she leads kind of by pushing them to do their best, but allows them to learn the hard lessons that they need to learn on their own. And she gives them the opportunities. So she doesn't hold them back from things. And I really value that about her.
Excellent. Anybody else want to share? Okay, I'll just go ahead then, and let's see if any of these names showed up on your list. You might have picked more than one. Any commonalities between your lists, either the names you shared or not? Got Martin Luther King up there, co-workers, bosses, some TV celebrities and such, so some fictional characters. Relatives, we heard cousin, right? So I didn't populate any of this while you were telling me the names, it's very common that we find some similar types of people and characters as effective leaders. And what about the traits? Have we heard almost all of these? Or when you jotted down traits, whether you shared or didn't, you see some commonality? Loving, compassionate, authentic, wise, calm, peaceful. Lots of great characters. So what this tells us, and anytime we do this exercise and intuitively know what great leadership looks like and what great spiritual intelligence looks like and feels like, because it's how they behave, but it's also how it impacts us, right? And how do we want to explore those kinds of traits and grow them so we can contribute to that way of being as well. And so just share a little bit about the research. A lot of scholars have been exploring this for years. It's still relatively new research, this SQ. But what people are finding is that when there's a higher propensity of SQ in leaders or in teams, that there are some great traits and impacts. And so I'll just share some of those. First of all, spiritually intelligent leaders are able to understand their own worldview and their values. They know that. They also know the limits of their own worldview. They have a belief in a higher purpose or a higher calling. A job is not just a job, right? They're there for something bigger in the world. They can separate their ego from their higher self and try to keep their higher self in charge more often. They can use difficulty and turn it into something positive. They operate from a sense of interconnectedness. They can see all the moving parts. They're great systems thinkers, which we really need in our businesses and organizations in society today. They can see that bigger picture. They're able to step back a little bit and see the patterns. And they're conscious also that other people have different worldviews, and they can be respectful and inquiring about that, being curious and asking the questions and presenting different ideas. They can make wise and compassionate decisions. And in that definition of wisdom and compassion, it's like a bird with two wings. We need both wings. We can make wise decisions and not be very compassionate. And we can be compassionate and not be very wise, right? It's one of my learnings when I went through this assessment myself when I was being trained. I was going through a particular situation, and there's a score for being a wise and compassionate leader, and I scored really low at that time. But I was also going through a very difficult work situation where I was internalizing some things. It was a bullying situation, and instead of putting the responsibility where it belonged, I was internalizing it. And so I answered very poorly about taking care of myself and respecting my own ability to make mistakes and forgiving myself for my own mistakes. So that was really an interesting learning, because in spiritual intelligence, another piece is that just because we're spiritually intelligent doesn't mean we aren't allowed to set boundaries. And so that was a really interesting piece that was unpacked for me going through this process. So I might have been compassionate in a certain way, but I wasn't being very wise about my own needs. So that was really interesting. Spiritual intelligent leaders can really step into a place of awareness where they can sense the future, be very curious, sort of that intuition piece, and have a sustaining faith in something beyond the individual self. And this SQ research is emerging because the old patterns just aren't working anymore. It used to be that we could look at the past, look at solutions, layer them on tomorrow's problems, and it's just not working. The reason is that the pace of change and complexity is so huge right now that we need a completely different way of coming at things, a different operating system. And people are really craving significance and meaning in their work. And there's been sort of an absence of that in the way society has been going at this frenetic pace. And we need to really bridge those great divides. There's this great economic divide, social divide, ecological divide, cultural divides. And I don't think we're going to be able to bridge that without coming at our situations with better thinking and a better way of being together. So if we want to be adaptive and resilient, we can't just wash, rinse, and repeat. We need to find a new way to deal with complexity. And spiritual intelligence is that new kind of operating system that we can tap into that will help allow us to do that. So there's so much information and knowledge in the world. In the 1900s, knowledge was doubling about every 100 years. By World War II, every 25 years, knowledge doubled. I think in the 80s is doubling every day. And I just think about how with COVID and what's happened in this last year, just the exponential amount of research, scholarly work, medicine, all sorts of information and knowledge. So, but information and knowledge doesn't always naturally translate into wisdom or significance. And so again, we need a better way of being in the world if we want to have wisdom and significance to contribute to our solutions. People want to be able to believe and have meaning and significance in their work. They want to have an opportunity to make a difference as well as a living. And that's why this is so important in our workplaces. So for some people, this spiritual intelligence thing might seem a bit floofy. What is all this about and what good does it actually do? But the research is showing that spiritual intelligence inspires employees to loyalty to a higher cause. It's not just a job. They substantially outperform their peers because they have this intrinsic motivation, and they produce better quality work, and their organizations and businesses often outperform their competitors. There's a greater sense of fulfillment at work, and so there's greater retention. That becomes a magnet for new staff. Employees are not just expendable resources. There's greater health and wellness and psychological well-being, less absenteeism and turnover. Interpersonal relationships are better because there's greater trust in organizations like this, a greater willingness for risk-taking. And I think we heard about some of that in one of the traits of who we admire. There's greater safety in these organizations. There's greater tolerance for the risk-taking, and you can make mistakes and you can learn from mistakes. And that's encouraged, actually. Those are healthy organizations when you're allowed to make mistakes. And that creates creativity and innovation. We can't be creative and innovative if we're afraid to make mistakes. And we can find comfort in the chaos because we feel empowered and called to work together with others, with higher source, to live through uncertainty to create something better. And so I'll just pause there for a minute and just see if there's any questions that people might have so far. Doing okay? Working okay for you so far? Okay, great. So I wanted to share the one skill about the awareness of our own worldview. And I'll walk through some of these and just see if any one of these would describe where you are at regarding your worldview. Because some people don't even recognize that they have a worldview. We just sort of, we are who we are, and this is the way we operate. And sometimes might not understand why we're bumping up against things. And understanding our worldview really helps with that. So can you effectively describe your own belief system? Like I said, a lot of people haven't thought about that. And the second one, that's hard to do if saying that my worldview isn't the only legitimate one. What you mean? I'm not right all the time. And number 3 is interesting too. I mean, we can look at our worldview with some humor and compassion, and maybe understand why some people might look at us if we explain our worldview and go, "Why on earth? What?" They might think that we're bizarre or something, right? They're baffled by what we believe, or we might be baffled by what they believe, and it helps to just come to a place of understanding of where people come from and why they think what they think. And number 4, is there a place for letting go? How comfortable are you with letting go of something that you've held closely for a long time? Have you ever had to do that? It was interesting. I used to do fundraising. I was visiting with this little old lady, well beyond 85, and talking with her, knowing that she came from a relatively conservative background, and with her age, I kind of made some assumptions about her opinions about some things, and we got into a conversation. And she was just so open and gracious, and a faith-filled person. And she said, "You know, we don't know everything yet." And I just love that, because she's 85 and they've been through so much in her life. And even at that age and having so much experience and knowledge, and she was a wise woman, she says, "We don't know everything yet." So I love that. It's kind of my little mantra. It's like, we don't know everything yet. And to be comfortable with that, right? How about number 5, being calm, reassuring, non-judgmental? Can we just respect where we're at and be courageous and centered and loving?
Can I ask a question, Kathy?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that our past 15 months or however long it's been now have given us quite a stretch in this area. If you look at the idea of to mask or not to mask, or to vaccinate or not to vaccinate, and it's become very polarized and in some cases political. I would find myself, or I do find myself, very coming up pretty short actually in this area, which is hard, but like I feel like I need to just comment on that, like given our current circumstances, and just wondering if you have any insights or thoughts. I don't even know how to really phrase it as a question, Kathy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean though, right? Like when you're convinced, for instance, if you're on the side of masking and vaccines, that you're so convinced that it needs to be done for the protection of our most vulnerable, for instance, if that's your viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question would be, how do you see with humor and compassion the other worldview? Or when tempers are so high, how do you react with grace or be calm and non-judgmental? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think so the number 3, seeing humor, our own worldview with humor and compassion, to say, okay, why are we thinking what we think? Why are we believing what we believe, right? And yes, this thing about masking and vaccinations and stuff it's really difficult if we have an opinion to get into the center, right? But we might look at the other people from a sense of compassion, because what are their fears? They have a fear that's a different kind of fear than we might have, or a different concern. So how do we get into a space of empathy to understand where they're coming from? And that's where maybe the challenge in convincing people from another side over to the other side, so to speak, is there enough time to understand what their fears are and then educate them based on where they're coming from, right? And yeah, a lot of patience and then knowing what's in our control. There's a center of control, there's a center of influence, and then a center of concern, and some of those people aren't in our control, right? They might be in our place of influence, but then how do we remain centered instead of angry, so that we can respond wisely and with empathy instead of anger and frustration? I don't know if that helps, but
It does help. It's just, yeah, so omnipresent right now. I just thought I'd love to hear what you said about it, and I appreciate your response.
yeah, thanks. And yeah, if we unpack some of the other related skills, it would probably all come together kind of quite neatly, because later on maybe we can talk about how I see all these skills as sort of intersecting and influencing each other. I draw little lines that kind of, you can't see that, but all these skills are interrelated, and so we might find another skill set that contributes to what you were talking about, Amanda. Anyone else? So our worldview comes from a number of different influences. It's our culture, our gender, race, religion, our politics, maybe family or friends. We might grow up in a family and there's a certain sort of habit or tradition or saying or belief, internal belief that we have that we don't know is different than somebody else's, right? It's sort of like a frog in boiling water or whatever, right? We don't necessarily know what we know until we step outside ourselves. Our level of personal development, our personality preferences, if our ego is in charge, our higher self is in charge, all of those sorts of things. And our worldview, without us knowing it, filters things in and filters things out until we become conscious that we have a worldview, and we are able to step outside of it once in a while to notice what we're thinking. So just, and we might practice understanding our worldview by trying to explain it to other people, like what makes a good parent, what makes a good leader, what is a life well lived, what happens after death, what's ethical, right? And this is another kind of maybe polar thing, but I was in Calgary at a conference and the subject was environment and the ethics. And this was some years ago when the other oil patch crash had happened. And on the spectrum, I'm more tree hugger, whale saver than I am industry proponent, but I see both sides, right? And I was talking about the environment and protecting the environment. And another woman talked about ethics in the context of so many people being unemployed and in great trouble that we need to have these jobs because it's unethical not to have these jobs because people are suffering. And so there's a bit of truth to both of those. Both of those have correctness to them. And they're the same topic, right? So then how do we hold these paradoxes and figure out how to make the best out of these polarities or paradoxes? That's an important leadership skill to develop. And I think spiritual intelligence helps us wrestle with those kinds of things. Also, what's sacred and what's profane? And an example here in North America, say when death happens, typically the typical habit has been you embalm a body with formaldehyde, you put it in a box, you put it 6 feet under, and that's respectful. That's our grieving process. That's been the common tradition. In Tibet, they have what's called a sky burial, where someone passes away and a religious leader then chops up a person's body and puts it in rocks and trees and holes and crevices so that the birds can come and eat that person. And then the birds fly off because they believe very much in sort of the cycle of life. And so that's very sacred for them, whereas they would look at our traditions and think that's very profane, right? And so just understanding that the same, how we deal with death can be very different in different worldviews, and being respectful of that and how it's important to people. So I've got a little activity here. Were most of you able to print this off on a color printer? You have a sheet. Is everyone ready to do an experiment here? What I'd like you all to do is just shout out, what is this? Let's talk about what image we're looking at here.
Like I would say chess or checkerboard. Is that what you're asking, Kathy?
Okay. Yeah, sure. What do you think you're seeing? What are you seeing here? Tell me what else is on the page.
It's a cylinder on the right-hand corner of a checkerboard.
Okay. Anybody else? What else do you see? Where are the letters and what's happening with the letters?
They're in a descending kind of slanty horizontal order.
Okay. What does A look like? What does B look like? What's it doing?
Kind of just sitting there.
Okay. The squares they're on, what do you see?
Well, the A is on a black square and isn't white, and then the B is on a white square with a black.
Okay. Yeah. Everyone agree with that? Are you sure about that? Everyone pretty confident that that's good description? Yes, no? Okay. If we're all in agreement, then what I'd invite you to do is take your scissors and cut away the B square from the image, if you can. And just do that now with your scissors. Or tear it if you don't have a scissors handy. Just tear away the B from the image. Has everyone done that? Still working on it? Got it? Ready? Give me a shout, or maybe a shout out to Dominica or something if you're not ready. Okay. So now what I invite you to do is take that little B square and put it right beside the A square. And what do you see? I look away and look back at it. Can anyone say what they're seeing? What just happened? Anything?
It's the same.
They're the same. Anybody else seeing the same thing?
There's no way I thought it was the same color.
Great. What happened there? It's a neat trick of the eye, right? But our mind tries to make meaning out of something. So you saw this image, and the human brain, the way we're evolved, it helps us. It helps us make, it jumps to conclusions, tries to make meaning of what we're seeing. So we thought, oh, checkerboard. Kind of looks like a checkerboard, but it's not officially a checkerboard because it doesn't have enough squares, right? It's a good assumption. But, and yeah, that green thing, it's sitting there, casting a shadow. So because we think we're looking at a checkerboard, our mind is trying to make meaning of that, and it saw the B square as being white because that fits in the pattern, right? We need to see patterns. It helps us make meaning out of life. You know, oh, bus coming, jump out of the way, right? It helps us. We need that. But sometimes it gets us in trouble because if this was a business decision and we didn't have the right information, or we made assumptions, we weren't asking enough questions, we might get into trouble, right? And so this is a little lesson in kind of worldview. Our worldview does that to us too, because we filter things out and filter things in. So how do we stay curious and ask questions, avoid assumptions before jumping to decisions? And we've talked about checkerboard. In fact, it's just dots of ink on a piece of paper, right? If we really narrow it down to what are we looking at, and it's not really even a checkerboard, it's just ink on paper. Right? So this is a fun way to remind us of how we just need to be careful about our assumptions. And there's a bumper sticker I saw that said, don't believe everything you think. Right? So we got to challenge ourselves once in a while. And if we foster spiritual intelligence, we can get more comfortable with challenging our assumptions. So I'm going to jump to the next one. And I sent a poem out, and was there anyone who would like to read it out loud and volunteer from the group? I'm happy to read it, but I'm curious if anyone wants to. Okay, I'll go ahead and just read it. There is a trough in the waves, a low spot where horizon disappears and only sky and water are our company. And there we lose our way unless we rest, knowing the wave will bring us to its crest again. There we may drown if we let fear hold us within its grip and shake us side to side and leave us feeling torn, disoriented. But if we rest there in the trough and are silent, being with the low part of the wave, keeping our energy and noticing the shape of things, the flow, then time alone will bring us to another place where we can see horizon, see the land again, regain our sense of where we are and where we need to swim. Just wanted to share that with you in context of trying to be comfortable in the chaos. And we've all been through a lot of chaos, either because of the pandemic or otherwise. And does that poem speak to you, or does anyone want to talk about that? Just wanted to share that with you as a way to sort of, we've been in some troughs, and sometimes we're on the crest and sometimes we're in the trough. You know, in my life, it's been both, right? But this idea around developing the skill of sustaining faith in difficult times encompasses some of these, and I'll let you read these skills yourself. But it's this idea that can we be comfortable in not knowing? How do we be grateful in difficult times? You know, and I've talked about some of my experience too, where I've had gratitude from some of those horrible experiences, and maybe you've had similar challenges. And how do we stay connected and grateful and believe in possibility? And how do we foster that, right? Stepping back maybe from a situation and trying to see what the bigger picture is, trying to check in with what's going on with our fear and our ego and our concerns if we're in a challenging situation. And what good comes from, say, the pandemic piece? There's polarity there too. There's been horrible things, but do we all know about good things that have emerged from this? And what might society and the world look like that could transition into something more positive after this? So I'll just move forward here around some tools for tough times. And I'd be interested to know if any of you have some coping mechanisms for difficult times, if any of those 5 sets of skills under that comfort and chaos slide resonated with you.
I use all of them.
Yeah, good, great. Anybody else? Okay, so I just have a few ideas here for tools for tough times, because if we're able to be more centered and manage through difficult times ourselves, then we're going to be more of a calm and healing presence for the people we're leading and we're with. Obviously, all these are interconnected again, but knowing who you are, knowing those values and your values hierarchy, so you know what to stand for, and yeah, how you handle those complexities. What is your purpose? Also knowing that we don't want to minimize difficulties that we're going through. We want to be real about it and not be Pollyanna, and certainly not ignore significant things that deserve our attention. But we also need to make sure we're not telling ourselves stories that steal our joy, because sometimes we put interpretations on things, right? Just like we interpreted that was a chessboard and that was a white square and a black square, right? And that happens in more important areas of our life too. So how do we step back and say, is there another way I can look at this? Or what are some of the positive aspects? Where can I maybe be grateful for something that seems to be a challenge? You know, I don't know what the situation means, and knowing that we don't know is okay. And instead of being answer people, just making room for the questions, right? So that zooming out is really helpful. Knowing what's in our control and what's where we can influence someone and where we might just need to let go because it's concern that we can't control. Just looking at my time here. So I'll go forward to this other little cheat sheet here. I've also sent out a handout that has some other tips for trying to manage in difficult times. And so there's a 9-step process that Cindy Wigglesworth writes about, and then she has the cheat sheet of the soul. That's easy to remember. But we're in a stressful situation. We can just choose to stop and remember to breathe, right? Doing some deep breathing and taking good care of ourselves, and ask for help, whether it's our higher power or another person, or going deeper into ourselves. Observing ourselves, so being really conscious, what's going on in my body and my brain, and what kind of assumptions, am I telling myself some myths, or is what's real about this? What can I really control? Just being really conscious about how we're reacting. Identify and embrace ego concerns. We so often talk about setting aside the ego, but I think we just need to be compassionate towards our ego, because we have fears and concerns for good reason. So rather than fight it, let's be compassionate. If we can be compassionate to ourselves, we can be compassionate to others. And look deeply. We can ask ourselves, why am I feeling this way? And ask ourselves, why again? And why again? Go deeper and deeper as to understanding, where is this coming from? And why do I think that? And where did that feeling come from? When I do this work with people, sometimes people can hardly get past the second why or the third why. It's hard to go deep sometimes because we really unpack the stuff. But if we do, we can also figure out how we can come at our challenges and problems with new ways, new eyes. And that means, yeah, looking how we can reframe things then. If we put on different lenses for a problem, we might be able to see things a bit differently. And then we can find different answers, right? Focusing on something to be grateful for. There's some neurological research that says when we spend time in gratitude, it actually does something to our brain that helps us cope better. And then whether it's a situation or a person, whatever we are dealing with, if we go through these steps, we can choose a more spiritually intelligent response. So that's really, really quick set of tips to give you. I also had, I'm just looking at time here. I think we may not have time, but I've given you a sheet that's a gratitude exercise, and we talked about how gratitude actually helps the brain function better. And you could use that little cheat sheet if you're ever feeling a bit stressed or concerned about anything. Just notice that. The first thing is noticing, and then spend some time writing down what you're grateful for. And The last couple ones are the hardest because I'm difficult. I'm grateful for my most difficult problems, so I'm grateful for a difficult person, you know. But if we can spend time thinking about gratitude, we might shift, and then that way we have more coping mechanisms to be able to deal with whatever we're facing. I just want to see. Anyone have any questions or comments about what we've heard so far? We've been through a lot really quickly. And I don't know if you have that little sheet in front of you that has the 21 skills, but if you can see how we've talked about worldview and how understanding our own worldview really helps us understand other people's worldview, and we can be open and curious about that. And to be a wise and effective change agent, for example, we want to be able to understand other people's perspectives because we need to understand where they're coming from. If we have a values hierarchy, we can actually live our values. If we're living our values, that can help us make those wise and compassionate decisions. And the awareness of and the limitations of our own worldview helps us as well. So all it feeds into how we can be better leaders, being present with people, managing change when it comes at us. Anyone have any comment on what you're seeing so far? This is so quick, so much to pack into such a short time, but I wonder what you're thinking so far. Anyone?
Thank you.
Has it been helpful? A little bit, some new ways of thinking about some things? Good. So offer this, if you want to go deeper, I do these assessments one-on-one. There's also teamwork we can do. It's especially useful, as you can probably see, in change management, because the way we come at problems can be very different if we come up from an SQ kind of lens. So for, I typically charge $277 for participants today. If they want to connect with me, I would do it for $177. And you'll receive a 21-page custom report for that and a debrief with me. And I don't punch a clock on the 90 minutes or whatnot if we're in a good conversation, or some people like to split it up because it's really thought-provoking, so they need more time to think through that. And I also thought I would offer, Dominique, I forgot to talk to you about this before we started, but a free draw today for all the people who are participants online today, to have their name drawn. If people want to be in a draw, we could do that maybe after the session. And if everyone wants to be in the draw, just give a wave or so, let Dominique know. And then I would do a debrief with you complimentary. And yeah. And if you're curious, if you happen not to be the winner, I'd love to talk to you about whether this is a fit for you. And so I just want to leave you with a couple thoughts. It's so important that we bring this kind of thinking and operating to the workplace, because what we've been operating with in the past just isn't working. David White says that we cause great injury by separating our soul from our work as if they're not connected. And he says we simply spend too much time, emotional and psychic energy at work for us to declare it a spiritual desert. And another author I really like is Ben Zander, who writes a book called The Art of Possibility. It's a great little book if you have a chance to pick it up. How to do this: start with you and give yourself permission to bring your own soul to the workplace. You be the risk taker. Somebody has to go first. And if you develop your own SQ and you encourage it in the workplace, it fosters great possibility. Make your workplace an oasis for creativity and possibility, and let other people do the same. Zander says our universe is alive with sparks, and let's think about possibility and capacity instead of lack. And that's it. Okay. That's all I had for now.
That was amazing, Kathy. Thank you so much for that presentation. I definitely know that I feel much more positive today than I was this morning. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments they'd like to ask Kathy? All of those handouts, I did notice they have your contact information on them. So if anyone has any direct questions, please reach out to Kathy or myself, and I can forward them if that's easier. But again, thank you so much, Kathy. We appreciate everything that you have done for this presentation. It's been wonderful.
Oh, good. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a lot to pack into, but I love talking about this stuff. So if you just want to connect with me later, that's great.
Great. Well, if nobody has any other questions, then we'll end it here with 3 extra minutes to go have a bathroom break and a coffee break before everyone's next meeting. So thank you again, Kathy, and we'll see everybody soon.
Okay, great. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.